I'm always thinking about shape and rhythm, especially. I would encourage you to do the same. Shapes are extremely important. You have to have good quality shapes. So don't ever let loose of those while you're painting.
You were about to meet a fabulous landscape painter, Rich Gallego. Rich, welcome to whatever the name of the show is. We don't have a name yet.
Hi, Eric. Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to see you.
I think we need to come up with a name. You got any ideas?
Well, I've been working on a series of paintings called Painting the American West. So maybe we just go with that.
Yeah, welcome to Painting the American West. Well, today it would apply because you're in the American West. Where are you?
Yeah, I'm in the high desert, about 2 hours northeast of Los Angeles.
Oh, you are in the high desert. So what would that be?
So that's the Palmdale, Lancaster area. If you're taking a trip up from LA to, say, the Eastern Sierra, I'm about a fifth of the way up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Terrific. Sounds like a beautiful area.
Yeah, it's the backside of the San Gabriel Mountains on one side, and then out to the northwest of me, you've got the Antelope Valley. So we've got a lot of cottonwoods and sycamore trees and sage and all that sort of things.
Well, speaking of cottonwoods, I'm going to show this. I'm going to show a couple of images of some of your work. That looks like cottonwoods to me. Yeah,
that's what that is. That area, you may have been hearing about some of the fires going on out here in California. And there's one called the Bobcat Fire that got to within about 20 minutes of where we live.
Oh, boy.
And I'm not sure if this particular place still looks like that, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, that's a tragedy. Well, let me show a couple other pieces of work. This looks like a value study or a black and white.
I'm sorry, that's a graphite study of a stream up in Glacier National Park.
Ah, okay. Love that place. That looks like one of the alpine lakes or something.
Yeah, that's Temple Crag.
You got to go to Temple Crag. I am so jealous.
Yeah, so that's the thing about this project, this Painting the American West. The subtitle is Painting in the Footsteps of Edgar Payne and Maynard Dixon. So I've been going to places where they painted and painting it in the same area, if not the same scenes. And this is one, of course, that Edgar Payne, frequented up outside of the Big Pine area.
That's on my bucket list. It's something that I want to do while I can still do it. And I know there's quite a bit of packing in and so on that's required. Well, maybe we'll go up there together sometime. All right. This looks like a tree portrait, trees and rocks.
Yeah, that's up in the Tehachapi Mountains, which is it's about an hour north of where I am. And it's just a study of some rocks and trees and shadow with the sunlight behind, backlit. Yeah. It's shapes that get me, and something about these rocks just really lured me to it. So
yeah, they're beautiful.
Thank you.
And what do we have here? Some snow.
Yeah, so up in the high desert here, today it's about 97 degrees, but come January and February, it could very easily get down to the teens, and we do get snow at least a few days most years.
Okay.
This was last year, just an area near the house.
All right. And, well, that's beautiful. Those look like eucalyptus?
No, they're actually pines. That was a study this is out in a place called Vallermo. It's on the backside of the San Gabriel Mountains, quite near where that first slide that you showed where the cottonwood was. And that's a scene that when I saw it, it reminded me of an Ivan Shishkin painting. And I thought, I'm going to take a shot at that. It worked for him. Not that I'm conflating my work with his, but I love the scene, and it was him that I was thinking about.
So when I take this trip I'm taking to Russia, I'm taking 50 artists to Russia, and we are actually going to some of the exact locations where Shishkin painted, Levitan painted. It's going to be pretty cool.
That would be cool. Absolutely.
Wow. That's a really beautiful piece of architecture. Well done.
Yeah, that's the Ostrander ski hut up in the Eastern Sierra. As you may have guessed by now, well, I know you know it already. The Eastern Sierra has just got such a wealth of wonderful scenery. That you can paint there your whole life and not get tired of it, I think.
Yeah. Well, you know, architecture can be kind of hard to pull off, and you've done it beautifully.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
So what are you going to do for us today?
So along those same lines, this is a piece behind me that I basically blocked in, and it's a scene from Lake Sabrina, or some people call it Lake Sabrina. I'm not really sure what the proper pronunciation is, but this is up in the Eastern Sierra, again, out of the Big Pine area. And this is just an inlet. The lake is actually it's maybe about 1/8 of a mile from this spot, but the water comes out of the high mountain, you know, the snow melt comes out. And this is just a scene that I really liked, the shapes. Normally when I see something that I want to paint, you know, some people, I guess, are attracted to color, maybe contrast, whatever. For me, it's usually shapes. If I see an arrangement of shapes that I like, and, you know, there's a lot that goes into what it is that makes me like it, you know, whether they work well together, is there a dominant shape that is going to add graphic impact from across the room, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But, you know, I saw this collection of shapes and thought I got to paint it. So what I did is, let me show you, this is the study for it. And I've got it taped to the bottom of the easel here. This is a gouache study.
Oh yeah, well, that's beautiful. Yeah.
So this is my reference for it. I don't like painting from photographs, and that's not to you know, minimize anybody else that does. I know how my brain works, and if I'm painting from a photograph, I tend to get too literal. You know, I've got a science background, and that may have something to do with it, but I get way too literal. So I like doing a study and then getting rid of the photograph and painting from the studies.
I am the same way. You know, I'm always shooting photographs in case I want to make a painting out of them, but I never use them because I have to. I try to do it either from memory or from life, you know, or a study that I've done from life, because it just, for some, I have the same problem, and I don't have a science background.
Yeah, well, there may be something else in your brain that makes that happen. I know with me, and like I said, I know people who do gorgeous work from photographs, and I understand what to do with them, right? I understand about how the darks get flattened out and the lights get bleached out and all that, but it just doesn't work as well when I do that. And in the same sort of a way, some people would ask me, if I'm doing a small piece into a big piece like this, well, are you going to use the grid system? I've tried it. All it does is make my work look really boring, and it takes the life out of it.
Yeah.
So for me, I'd rather just use the study and then eyeball it and see what comes of it.
Well, Richard, we're going to be back with you in just a second, and we're going to get to see you paint. That's pretty exciting.
All right. Thank you, Eric. So what I'm working on here today is enlarging a piece that I did from a gouache study, which I showed a little bit earlier. And this is a scene up in the Eastern Sierra here in Southern California. It's a place called Lake Sabrina. This is an inlet from some of the snow melt. This is a seasonal sort of an event, I think. I don't think this stream that I'm painting is a year-round phenomenon. But all I've done so far is sort of block in the major shapes. And in doing that, there are certain things that I'm keeping in mind. And one of them is, you know, do the shapes work well together? And by that, I mean, are they varied in their angles and in their sizes? I don't want anything being too much the same, because then you have problems with something looking too static and uninteresting. The other thing I'm keeping in mind is there's an idea of, everybody I think is familiar with the term color harmony, but there's also such a thing as shape harmony. And what I'm referring to is, you know, if I've got this big shape up here, this mountain that's got this point on it, are there other places where I can make smaller versions that have, maybe they're a different shape like this here, but they have that recognizable point here, here, even down here in this smaller shape, and here as well. And what that does is it takes one feature of this dominant shape and it spreads it around to other places where it's not an exact replica, but it adds harmony as far as the type of shapes they are. So I'm thinking about that. I'm also thinking about spacing, and a concept called asymmetrical rhythm, which all that really means, it's a big fancy term that means when you've got shapes like these darks, these, you know, and these are just really roughed in, the spacing between these trees, it's making them so that they're not equidistant. They're not the same space between them. There's a very small space here and here, then there's a large space before the next one. And then from this tree to this dark shape here, which is a mountain, there's a different space. And the reason I want to do that is because, and I won't get too much into the weeds, but there are studies that have shown that our brains engage deeper and for a longer period of time when there's asymmetry like that. So that's the layout of it. I've done the same thing in the clouds up here as far as the spacing. And now what I need to do is start adding to this piece. And I'm thinking specifically about the idea that warms advance and cools recede. And when I block this in, I'm thinking more about just placing my shapes and getting approximate values. But this is not nearly dark enough to come forward from this mountain back here. So the first thing I'm going to do is start getting this darkened in, and I'm also going to warm it a bit, both of which will aid in bringing it forward toward the viewer. And at this point, the canvas is still, it's not bare, but it's almost just stained. So there may be, you may hear a scraping sound, which is the bristles against the canvas. And that will disappear as I add subsequent layers of paint. And as I do that, I will start laying on thicker paint at a lower angle to the canvas. And it'll become silent because at that point, I'll be putting thicker paint on top of the existing layers, but I won't be pushing it in. So essentially, there will always be a layer of paint between the bristles and the canvas. And the way I remind myself not to push too hard and it's muddy is by listening to it, strangely enough. For me, that works. And because if I'm painting directly like this, like I'm blocking in, you may be able to hear that.
What do you mean? By actually listening to your brush on the canvas?
Yeah, you can hear that, yeah? So that's early on, but as I develop it, like I said, there will always be a layer of paint between my brush and the canvas, so they'll never actually touch, and it'll be silent.
Okay.
And the reason I bring that up is because I have students sometimes that complain that their paintings are getting muddy, and they think and it's a reasonable assumption. They think, well, I'm mixing it improperly. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're mixing it properly, but then when they go to apply it to their surface, they're simply pressing too hard, and what they're doing is they're contaminating it with the initial layers, which may not be exactly what they were looking for. So the application of the paint is actually quite important. And in fact, the other thing that, and I'm sorry I don't have a secondary camera to show you, but when I pick up the paint, I'll show you real quickly here. I do it by making a side-to-side motion. My brush gets a flat edge on it, and I'm making a side-to-side motion while pushing it forward through the paint. And I pick up a bead of paint at the tips of the bristles so that the paint never gets down near the ferrule, and it doesn't go in between the bristles much because it can't do me any good there. It doesn't land on the canvas if that's where it is. But if I keep a big thick bead of paint up near the tips of the bristles, then I can lay it down and manipulate it the way I want. And that actually helps me not get muddy. And I think you can see, as this is darkening and getting warmer, get some warmth in here, that it's starting to come forward visually. As warm as we'll do. And we need to do the same over here. You can hear the scrubbing because that's just very thin right there. And these are separate rocks that have recessed areas between them that I will go in and darken. This is it's a fairly large canvas. This is a 30 by 40. And if there are people out there that are thinking, oh, that's too big, it's not any more complex, really. It's all the same decisions that you have to make on a smaller canvas. But I would encourage you to start with a larger brush. In fact, I try to always start with as large a brush as I can and keep it using it for as long as possible, because it keeps me from getting too detailed too soon. So now we've got, you know, things darkening up, and I can start thinking a lot about temperature and how I can make some of these shapes that are in shadow come forward a bit. And there's a slight variation in value, but mostly it's a temperature shift. It brings them forward and starts giving me the illusion of some contour. It's amazing what these darks can do once you get them in. And if you see me looking beyond the camera at this point, it's because I've got a large mirrors opposite end of my studio that allows me to see this without, you know, from a distance without stepping back. And so already I can see that this is coming forward and it's pushing this other stuff back, which is exactly what I want. So we'll just keep going with that for a bit. And I don't like to work on the same area for too long a period of time. I'll come back to this. It's clearly not done, but I like to move to other areas of the painting because that allows me to constantly look at one shape as it relates to the others around it. That way, I don't make everything have the same amount of detail. If I were to do, and I know there are other ways to do it that work for people, and that's great. I think one that has to know themselves, and I know how my brain works. And if I were to decide to paint from the background to the foreground, everything would end up with the same amount of detail in it. And the problem with that is that that's not the way we experience the world, right? When we look at something, we focus on something, we see things in our peripheral vision, but we don't see it with the same clarity, with the same sharpness and detail. So if I do the clouds first and finish them, you know, bring them to, you know, resolution completely, and then I move to the mountain, and then I move to the midground, and so on, everything will end up having the same level of detail and finish. And what happens is it ends up looking like you painted it from a photograph, because that is not really the way that we experience the natural world. So what I'm trying to do is move around from different areas of the painting, and I'll come back, but I don't like to spend more than a few minutes in one place. And this way I can constantly relate this shape to this shape and this shape to this shape and so on. And the idea is to get the proper values, the way they, and by proper I mean have them relating properly, so that everything ends up spatially where it's supposed to be. And it values really is a thing. So if I'm blocking something in like this, I might look at that and think, well, that's a little bluer than I want it. That's not a problem. It's only a problem if it's too light. And this being oil paint, if it's too dark, I can always lighten it up. If it's too light, it becomes a more difficult task to darken it. But if that's too blue, I can warm it with an appropriate value of a red. But again, right now I'm looking at this compared to this and this. This rock is further back, and I want some variety anyway. I want them all to look exactly the same. But as I'm moving them back into space, I do want them to cool off somewhat. And the other thing is, you know, the way we indicate depth, there's several things that we can do. We can overlap forms, which you see happening with these rocks. You can clearly tell, or at least you will be when the painting's done. that some rocks are in front of others. They're all in front of the mountain. So overlapping of forms, but the other thing, diminution as well, is things get smaller as they go back in space, right? But the other is the whole warms advance and cools recede. There's a compression of the value range as well. So if I've got light and shadow on this rock here, and I've got light and shadow on this mountain, the darks here are much darker than the darks there. The lights here are much lighter than the lights up here, because the range becomes compressed between light and dark as you go back into the distance. So that's, and then the fifth is you want to have softer edges in the deep space in the distance than you will up front. So all of these things I'm thinking about as I'm advancing on this piece, because I'm trying to get the illusion of 3 dimensions in which really a two-dimensional space. And where I can, because I can always come back and alter strokes or portions of strokes. Where I can, I want to make direct strokes, because if I start dabbing at it, it ends up, people will know what it is you're trying to paint, but it ends up having a lack of confidence to it. And I think that people can usually tell when somebody doesn't have confidence in their paintings. You can see it in the brushwork. And the viewer might not always be able to articulate that, but they know something's not right. And I want to give them as few opportunities to say something's not right about my painting as possible. Now, another thing that I want to mention here, and again, this is the way I do it. It's not the only way, obviously. As I was alluding to with Eric a few minutes ago, the way my brain works, I have a tendency to get more literal than I might want to. And so to combat that, I kind of tell myself to take some liberties. And if I feel like I want to get something warm in the foreground, just to add variety to what's there, I really feel no compunction about doing that. Now, if you're painting an iconic scene that everybody's familiar with, then you obviously want to take care about that, because you don't want people telling you, oh, that's not at all what it looks like. But with landscapes, there's usually more flexibility, and you have the opportunity to take some liberties with it that you might not have, say, with portraiture or figurative work. So what I'm thinking here is that if I can get some warms tucked in here from place to place, that's going to help this foreground come forward more and add to the illusion of 3-dimensionality. And they may be grasses, it could be rocks, it could be something that you can't even tell what it is. But if it's cooler in the front, cooler in the back generally, and warmer in the front, that's going to add to the illusion, and that's kind of what I'm after. All right, so I've spent some time here. Now I'm going to move up to the sky. As I said, I like to move around and keep comparing one area to another.
These are great tips, Rich.
Well, thank you very much, Eric. I have to say, I know you didn't ask, but I hope you don't mind my saying, there's very little that I figured out on my own. This is all stuff that I learned from, wonderful painters. Some of them living, some of them not. But as they say, we all stand on the shoulders of giants, and some of them you guys all know. Scott Christensen, Matt Smith, Michael Lynch I don't know where that guy's from. He's in another planet. as far as his work is so good in my opinion. But I've learned a lot from them. We were talking a little earlier about some of the Russian painters. Those guys blow my mind. But the idea is to take from them and put them into your own work, and hopefully keep on learning. So I appreciate the compliment, but very little of this is original theory. Up to the clouds. Sorry, I saw another spot there that I wanted to get some warmth into. So I was watching a movie the other day, and it's not the first time I've seen it, but I hadn't seen it in a while. A lot of you probably have seen it. It was called, what was it called? I can't remember. About a painter, high school guy that just graduated, and he wanted to go study with a Russian master that he found out was living in his town. And during that, one of the exchanges between those two characters, this Russian guy is telling him, his name was Serov. He tells him to, and I don't know if they were talking about actual Serov, but anyway, he tells him to look at the sky and ask what color the clouds are. And the gist of it was, clouds are not white. There is no white in nature.
Yeah,
everything has color.
It was not the original Seraph, but it was George Gallo's actual instructor. George Gallo, the director of the film, who of course is a friend of yours and mine, and what a great painter he is too.
Yeah, and I love that movie because there's some truths spoken in there and that was one of them, that there's color in everything, and nothing is pure white.
The movie is called Local Color.
Local Color, that's it. I don't know why that name escaped me. Yeah, I do. I'm not 27 anymore. I think that's probably why.
Nah, it has nothing to do with it. So you've got about 15 minutes left, Rich. You're doing great.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to look at the sunlit. Now, some of you may be able to see just in the block. This is just stained canvas here, where I've kind of made some mental notes where it's a little bit darker here, and this is just to let me know where the sunlit parts of the clouds are and where the shadow parts are. And there's that scraping again because I'm just kind of scrubbing it in. And clouds, that's a whole other thing. I could do full lesson just on painting clouds. One of the things that I would tell people about them, aside from the fact that there's more color in there than you think, a lot of times if you're painting the shadows of clouds, people make them too dark, and they end up looking like they're kind of pasted on. And oftentimes the shadow side of a cloud is the same value as the blue sky around it. In other words, something like this relationship here, it's the same value. The difference is in the temperature, the sky being cooler. So if I'm painting that shadow part right there, let me just show you real quickly. I don't need to paint it real dark purple or anything to convince people that it's a shadow. And if I want it to look like it's floating in air, I'm going to be better off if I make it much lighter. In fact, about the same value as the sky. But in this case, it's just warmer. And I would, probably go in and adjust that too. But you can see that lavender right there is not a lot darker. I'll lighten it up even a little bit more. It's not a lot darker than the blue. It's approximately the same value, or will be when I'm done here. And the way you can tell is if you squint at that interface there between those two shapes, the line between them sort of disappears. So really, that's not any darker. It's the purple, because it's got some red in it, is just a bit warmer. And when I have that shadow side, and then I put the sunlit side with this pale yellow next to it, that lost edge that's created by the similar value is what makes this thing look like it can float in midair. So I guess that's a long way around of saying don't make your cloud shadows too dark, unless you're painting some real stormy day or something.
Even then. The
other thing about these clouds in this particular piece is that I wanted them to have a sense of, and it'll be more apparent once they're all painted in. I wanted them to have a sense of that they're radiating from the horizon behind these mountains, so that they're coming out, from a vanishing point over the vault of the sky. Because in my opinion, it helps that assuming the viewer is standing right here looking at this scene, those clouds coming out and going overhead make it feel more three-dimensional, and I think it aids in making the viewer feel like they're there, which, who doesn't want that as a painter?
Absolutely.
All right, so there's going to be a lot more of this with the shadows here, and then the sunlit stuff. Right now, I'm going to move on to some of this and maybe some of the trees here before we run out of time for this session.
Hey, I just wanted to tell you that I've got some clouds here. Just a perfect timing here. Look out!
Oh, wow!
Those clouds.
Yeah, exactly what I'm talking about. You can see where the shadow sides just sort of disappear. If you squint, they just go away, and it's just a temperature shift between them and the sky.
Not much difference.
Yeah.
I ordered those just so they'd be here to make the point today.
I appreciate it. And as far as these trees go, while I'm looking at them, these are pines. These are conifers of some sort. And I would really encourage you. And, there are people watching who already know this, so forgive me if I'm getting too rudimentary for you. But for those of you who are kind of earlier on in the journey, when you're thinking of painting pine trees, really pay attention to the shape. And by that I mean, don't think of them as pine trees. Just think of them as shapes and values. Because for some reason, pine trees is a connection with Christmas or something. You tell somebody to paint a pine tree and they paint something that looks perfectly manicured. And in nature, it's rarely that way. And I don't want a shape here that's going to look too manufactured, look like it's been pruned earlier in the day, because that takes away the authenticity of what I'm trying to convey here. So right here, I'm trying to make sure I still have, and I'm going to keep building this up, but I'm going to make sure that I still have a semblance of light and shadow. And I'm constantly paying attention to the shape. And to me, I like this shape right now. It's not too uniform. It's not too symmetrical. Where landscapes are concerned, it seems like our brains prefer asymmetry. So that's what I want.
Okay, we're about the 8-minute mark there.
Thicker paint going on some of these passages here. Which reminds me also, if you're somebody who struggles with getting enough paint on the canvas, I think I understand why that is. I think we have a tendency, especially with cadmiums, which tend to be a little costly, I think we have a tendency to think that if we are more judicious, if we use less paint, we'll be able to control it better. And that actually seems logical, but in fact, the opposite is true. It's counterintuitive, but if you have more paint on your brush, on your canvas, don't know if it's true or not, but it was relayed to me. I think it was Dan Pinkham that was telling me this a couple of years ago about, because I believe he studied with Russian Sergei Bongard.
Sergei, yeah.
There was a story about how to a painter in his class and told him, you're not using enough paint, use more paint. And this went on several times. And finally, Bongard got a little bit frustrated, came over and squirted out every ounce of paint that the painter had on the palette and told him, use all that. When it's all gone, call me over and we'll look at your painting, or something to that effect. And the point being, you got to use more paint if you want to, make it do what you want it to do. So if you're sneaking up on your paintings but not using enough paint, it's a mental block sometimes. Just go ahead and squeeze out a bunch and put it to use.
Well, the other thing I was going to mention is that there are times, I know this happens to me anyway, I start running out of paint, and instead of, because I'm lazy, instead of going to put more paint out, I'll just start trying to compromise and use some other colors or something. And then, of course, I screw everything up.
So that sounds like you've done what pretty much every other painter has done. I think we're all guilty of that from time to time, Eric. I wish I could remember who it was that told me. It might have been actually from Richard Schmidt's book. But the idea that we should paint every inch of every painting as well as we can. And so when I find myself doing things like that, just because I'm lazy or saving time or whatever my excuse is, I try to remind myself that's not an example of painting it as well as I can paint it. I mean, I think we have, as painters, we have a really special position in the world, and we get to go places like this, right? I got to actually stand here and see this in person.
Yeah, well, not only do we get to go, but we actually recognize them, right? So remember your life before you were a painter and you didn't really see light and color. You were just like, oh, that's pretty. But when you can stare at it for 2 or 3 or 4 hours, rather than running up and taking a photograph, you stare at it, it changes your life.
You're absolutely right. And I tell people that, if you're driving down the street and you see some brown vertical thing with green stuff around it, your survival instinct tells you that's a tree, don't drive into it. And that's really the only level on which you have to engage it. But if you're going to go paint that tree or draw that tree, now you got to look at all the subtle value of temperature shape changes. You got to look at all the negative spaces, and there's so much more information. But the gift, in my opinion, is that we get to experience the world on a level that most people don't. And which leads me to thinking about, what role does beauty play in our lives? And I can go on and on, but I won't. I'll just tell you that I've come to the conclusion that this can be a miserable place without beauty.
Absolutely.
And so I want to imbibe every little bit of it that I can. And when I get to go somewhere like this, or even just outside looking at the way light's hitting a particular clump of weeds or something, if I can find beauty in that, my life is enhanced. I win.
You can, I think the ideal workshop sometimes is just to bring your students into the back alley where there's a bunch of garbage cans and say, look how, look and try to find beauty in this. And, you see the way light hits things, it can be amazing. Well, Rich, absolutely. I think this is probably a good time to stop. You've made a lot of progress. Any final thoughts? You want to just kind of tell people, just kind of reiterate what you've done here?
Yeah, starting with a block-in, paying close attention to the shapes and making sure that they relate well to one another, meaning they're not, exact replicas of each other, making sure that my space isn't divided equally. Thinking about darks, high contrast between light and dark, moving things forward, warms moving things forward, and the opposite of those things, pushing them back. I'm always thinking about shape and rhythm, especially. I would encourage you to do the same. Shapes are extremely important. You have to have good quality shapes. So don't ever let loose of those while you're painting. And other than that, like I said, I consider being an artist a blessing. And, don't get discouraged. It's like anything else. If you keep practicing and you keep studying and you seek out people who know more than you, get critique and have alligator skin. Don't let anything anybody says negative about it affect you.
Yeah, that is so true. And we have in our culture, we have this misperception that people who can paint have natural talent. And yet, I mean, there are some from time to time, but most of them are people like us who have had to learn it. And I can't tell you how many people have walked away from it and stopped because they do it a couple times and they felt like, well, I can't get it. I should have it. And we don't expect that of a brain surgeon or even a musician. And yet we expect it for artists, and it's just not true. Well, Rich, this has been absolutely fascinating. I hope you'll post a picture once you're done.
Absolutely.
Everybody can find Rich at his website, which is richgallego.com. It's Gallego. And so, Rich, again, thank you so much for coming on today. It's a real pleasure to see you.
Oh, thank you, Eric. My pleasure. Absolutely.